In this tutorial, we're going to cover creating a blueprint. So we've connected to vCenter, we've created our groups, we've given the group resources against a cluster. Now they need something to provision against those resources. We're going to go ahead and go to Enterprise Administrator. We're going to go to Global Blueprints. And then we're going to create a new blueprint, type virtual. I'm going to go ahead and give it a name. Windows 2008 R2X64. You can change your display icon. Choose the group that you want to have access. If you want to override your default machine prefix, you can do that here. And you can also, if you want to assign an approval policy, by default there's a policy for group manager or no approvals. We'll talk about creating approval policies in another tutorial. You can define a max number of this type of blueprint per user. So you can contain how many of any one type of blueprint your consumers can have. And you can also define your archive days. This is going to be used for if there's a lease set against the machine and that lease comes up and expires. Archiving the machine basically powers it off but leaves it in the infrastructure, so if that user needs to get it back, they can go through and ask to have that machine brought back out of archive, and they can then power it on and make it usable. This is handy for any machine in the environment that whether its lease runs out or the owner wants to expire it because they feel they don't need it anymore, and within a reasonable period of time that they may need to get it back, pull some data off the machine, or do some more testing against that machine. We can assign a daily cost to the blueprint. I'm actually not going to do that right now. We're going to cover costing in another tutorial. Now we're going to go over to build profile. We're going to choose our platform type. One thing to point out here is you see we have Hyper-V, vCloud, vSphere, XenServer, and generic. When we pick a specific platform, that puts us into a situation where we can choose platform-specific provisioning, as well as some non-platform specific. But if I choose vSphere, it's not going to present me with an option to provision against, using a provisioning mechanism that Hyper-V supports. Doing generic allows you to use provisioning mechanisms that you could create blueprints that you can provision across any platform, such as Kickstart for Linux or Windows Win provisioning, where I can create that generic template that actually, once the container is created, I'm going to stream or auto install that operating system into that container, making it more versatile if you have multiple hypervisors in your environment. But for now, we're going to do vCenter. We're not deploying a workstation, we're doing a server. And I'm not creating it, I'm going to do a clone. Once I choose clone, it gives me my clone workflow, which is the one that's available. I can go here and select from this picker, and it's going to show me all the available templates that are in the environment. So I'm going to choose my 2008 R2 template. And once I do that, the other thing I can do is optionally specify a customization spec. I highly recommend using customization specs. Obviously you can configure them to join your machine into the domain, all those useful things. But we are also able to do some additional things when you use a customization spec. One of those things is overriding the IP settings to statically assign IP addresses to the virtual machines. Also, auto-host naming the machines, right? And then, of course, your customization spec, when cloning, can join a machine into a domain. There's other benefits to that as well. In one of my later tutorials, I'm going to show you how to auto-install our guest agent using a customization spec run once, so you don't have to build it into your template. So, next on is machine resources. This is where you can define, when a user makes a request for a machine, what can they request, right? The minimum is defined by the blueprint itself. So Always a good idea to make your templates, the template itself, always a good idea to make your templates as minimal as possible. If I made this template have 4 CPUs and 8 gigs of RAM, well, that would be the minimum I can configure for this blueprint. So my template has 1 CPU, 1 gig of RAM. I can allow my users maybe to request up to 4 CPUs and 4 gigs of RAM. Now, for my reservation, it might be a little bit unrealistic, right? I've got 8 gigs of memory, but we'll roll with it. 200 gigs of storage, and I can define a lease period for how long they can have the machine for. Now, they can always extend the lease or even make it a permanent lease by request after they own the machine. You also see this other field called approval at. Had I assigned an approval policy, I could also specify at what resource threshold do I actually want to trigger an approval. If I define the minimum, I'm always going to trigger an approval for every single request. However, I could define, say, 2 gigs of memory. And if somebody requests a machine for less than that, they're going to get it without approval. But if they hit that threshold or go higher, it's going to trigger an approval. Next, I have my OS drive that is part of my template, but I can also add additional drives to this blueprint. So if I needed a data disk or however many drives I need to add, I can add those volumes. You'll see later on down the road when we do a more extensive blueprint that not only can we attach those disks to the VM that's created, but using our guest agent, we can actually go into the operating system, partition format, assign a drive letter and label for Windows, partition format, and do a mount point for Linux. So storage reservation policies we'll talk about later. Max number of volumes. So you can allow your requesters to add volumes as part of the request. And in here you can define the max number of volumes that they can request. If you leave it blank, it's going to be up to a maximum of 15. 0 disables it altogether, as well as max number of network adapters as well. Define at 0, they cannot add any, but you can define if you want them to be able to add additional ones if you have multiple network needs. I'm going to call that 2. I'm going to go over to our properties tab. We have to add at least one property to our blueprint. I know we haven't discussed properties yet, but we will get to that as well. For more information on that, there's some articles on dailyhypervisor.com that you can certainly go read. We're going to define the operating system property. We're going to set its value. Let's get this in here. To Windows 7 Server 64 Guest. What this does, when we send a request into vCenter, it's telling them what operating system to tag that VM as for VMware tools and some other things it needs to know the OS for. Although we require it for cloning, you would assume that the template would already have that information in it, but it is possible to clone an empty template. So practices define these properties no matter what for any vCenter deployments. Next, we go on to the security tab, and here you can determine what the owner can do to the machine after they have it. We got destroy, reprovision, great lab functionality. So if I'm doing some lab testing, development, whatever, and I make some changes to my machine that I really didn't like and I didn't snapshot it, what I'm able to do is actually reprovision the machine, which would tell VCSE to go and just rip it out, destroy it, and reprovision it out to the exact specs that it was built to when I originally had it. So a pretty cool feature there. Expire, power on, power off, reboot. Connect via RDP or SSH if it's Linux, or connect using VDI if it is a VDI session, but this is a server, so I'm just going to go ahead and uncheck that, even though it wouldn't show up anyhow. And then we have the snapshot manager, and of course then there's VM reconfigure that allows you to go in and change the parameters of the machine after it's been built. Up, raise or lower memory, CPU, add disk, grow disk, those types of things. I'm going to go ahead and say OK. So we now have a blueprint. So what we can do is actually go up to self-service, request machine, and select our blueprint. And now we can make a request. You can see I can change the number of these machines I want, what my lease duration to be, number of CPUs, memory, and of course storage as well. You're going to see the OS drive storage defined here, but there is a separate tab that you can use to add an additional volume to that virtual machine. So I can add another 1 gig volume to the machine if I want, and then I'm going to go ahead and say OK. If I go ahead and click on My Machines, I'll see there's my host name, came from my machine prefix, and my request is being initialized. And in this interface, unlike the new self-service portal, this does not auto refresh. So in this portal, I'm going to have to go ahead and click refresh to see it's gone into the clone machine state, which means it's now sending the activity out to vCenter for it to go ahead and initiate the clone of that virtual machine. And that's actually being done through that vSphere proxy agent that we configured earlier. What's happening is that proxy agent will check into the Cloud Automation Server to see if it has any work for it to do. Next time it checks in, that work's going to be sitting in the queue. It's going to pick it up, and then it's going to go ahead and process all the workflows and go out and communicate with vCenter to facilitate the activities. If I actually bring my vCenter down into the mix, we can see it's going ahead and cloning that virtual machine based on that request. And of course, that's going to take a few minutes to get done, but that machine will get cloned. We can take a look-see here. There's my machine there, IT-001 being cloned. So once that finishes, it'll power on, apply the customization spec, and once all that's completed, it'll go into an on state, and then I can manage my virtual machine. So that's creating a blueprint and requesting a virtual machine from that blueprint. Thank you for watching.